Question 1. The monitoring system demonstrates a slight but consistent upward trend in average sale prices for comparable properties in the Halifax Regional Municipality over the past quarter, coupled with a decrease in new listings. Considering these market dynamics, which of the following approaches best reflects responsible professional practice for a real estate licensee in Nova Scotia advising a seller? Option A. Conduct a detailed comparative market analysis, CMA, based on the most recent sales data and current inventory levels to advise the seller on a realistic and competitive asking price and potential sale timeline. Option B. Suggest a drastic price reduction to capitalize on the current buyer urgency, aiming for a sale within the next 2 weeks, irrespective of the property's appraised value. Option C. Advise the seller to immediately list the property at a significantly higher price than initially discussed, anticipating a rapid escalation in market values. Option D. Recommend that the seller delay listing the property for at least 6 months, predicting a substantial market correction that will lead to lower prices. Correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed comparative market analysis, CMA, based on the most recent sales data and current inventory levels to advise the seller on a realistic and competitive asking price and potential sale timeline. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee in Nova Scotia to interpret fluctuating market data and advise a client without resorting to speculative predictions. The licensee must balance the client's desire for a quick sale with the ethical obligation to provide accurate and responsible guidance, avoiding any actions that could be construed as misleading or that exploit market volatility for personal gain or to pressure the client. The challenge lies in translating raw market dynamics into actionable, ethical advice. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough analysis of current market conditions, including recent sales data, inventory levels, and buyer activity within the specific Nova Scotia market segment. This approach prioritizes providing the client with objective information and a realistic assessment of their property's current market value and potential sale timeline. It aligns with the Nova Scotia Real Estate Services Act and the Real Estate Guild of Nova Scotia's Code of Ethics, which mandate honesty, integrity, and the duty to act in the client's best interest by providing accurate information and avoiding misrepresentation. This approach empowers the client to make an informed decision based on factual data, not speculation. Incorrect approach is analysis. Advising the client to immediately lower the asking price significantly based on a perceived imminent market downturn, without concrete evidence of such a shift, is an incorrect approach. This could be seen as pressuring the client into a decision based on unsubstantiated fears, potentially violating the duty to act in the client's best interest and providing advice that is not grounded in objective market analysis. It risks undervaluing the property and could be interpreted as a failure to properly market the property at its true potential value. Suggesting the client hold off on listing the property for several months, anticipating a significant price increase, is also an incorrect approach. This constitutes speculation about future market conditions, which is outside the scope of professional advice and can lead to misrepresentation. The licensee is obligated to advise based on current realities, not future predictions, and failing to do so could breach fiduciary duties and ethical guidelines regarding providing accurate market assessments. Recommending an aggressive, short-term marketing blitz with a substantial price reduction to force a quick sale, regardless of the property's intrinsic value or the client's financial needs, is an incorrect approach. This prioritizes a quick transaction over the client's best interests and could be seen as a failure to properly represent the property's value. It may also violate ethical obligations to avoid actions that could be perceived as manipulative or exploitative of market conditions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that emphasizes data-driven analysis, clear communication, and client-centric decision-making. This involves 1. Gathering and analyzing all relevant current market data for the specific Nova Scotia locale. 2. Presenting this objective data to the client in an understandable format. 3. Discussing potential scenarios and their likelihood based on the data, while clearly distinguishing between factual analysis and speculation. 4. Collaborating with the client to develop a strategy that aligns with their goals and the current market realities, always prioritizing their best interests and adhering to all regulatory and ethical obligations. Question 2. The audit findings indicate that a real estate licensee in Nova Scotia has received a substantial deposit from a buyer for a property transaction. The buyer has instructed the licensee, via email, to immediately transfer these funds directly to the seller's personal bank account, bypassing the licensee's designated trust account, stating it will expedite the closing process. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensee to take? Option A. Disburse the funds directly to the seller's personal bank account, as per the buyer's instructions to avoid delaying the transaction. Option B. Transfer the funds to the seller's personal bank account and make a note to deposit the funds into the trust account, and then immediately withdraw them to send to the seller once the audit is complete. Option C. Refuse the buyer's request and inform them that the funds will be held until the closing date without offering any further explanation or assistance. Option D. Immediately contact the buyer to explain the regulatory requirements in Nova Scotia regarding the handling of client deposits, specifically the mandatory deposit into a trust account, and discuss compliant alternatives to expedite the closing. The correct answer is D. Immediately contact the buyer to explain the regulatory requirements in Nova Scotia regarding the handling of client deposits, specifically the mandatory deposit into a trust account, and discuss compliant alternatives to expedite the closing. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential breach of professional conduct and regulatory requirements concerning the handling of client funds in Nova Scotia. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate the delicate balance between client instructions, regulatory obligations, and ethical responsibilities, particularly when those instructions might conflict with established legal frameworks. The licensee must exercise careful judgment to ensure compliance and protect the client's interests while upholding the integrity of the real estate profession. The correct approach involves immediately seeking clarification from the client regarding their intent and explaining the legal and regulatory implications of their request within Nova Scotia. This approach is correct because it prioritizes open communication and education. Section 39 of the Real Estate Trading Act, Nova Scotia, and the associated regulations mandate that all trust funds received by a registrant must be deposited into a trust account. By explaining the regulatory framework, the licensee fulfills their duty to act with honesty and integrity, as outlined in the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission Code of Ethics. This proactive communication allows the client to make an informed decision that aligns with legal requirements, thereby preventing potential regulatory violations and safeguarding the client's assets. An incorrect approach would be to directly disburse the funds as instructed without further inquiry. This fails to acknowledge the statutory requirement to deposit all trust funds into a designated trust account, as stipulated by Nova Scotia's real estate legislation. Such an action could be construed as a misappropriation of funds or a failure to adhere to trust accounting procedures, leading to disciplinary action by the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission. Another incorrect approach would be to refuse the client's request outright without providing any explanation or alternative solutions. While the client's request may be problematic, a complete refusal without attempting to educate or guide them demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and client service. It fails to uphold the licensee's duty to act in the best interests of the client, within the bounds of the law. A further incorrect approach would be to proceed with the disbursement while making a personal note to rectify the situation later. This is a dangerous and unethical practice. It bypasses the mandatory trust accounting procedures and creates a significant risk of error or oversight. Furthermore, it demonstrates a disregard for regulatory compliance and the principles of transparency and accountability expected of licensed professionals in Nova Scotia. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's objective. Subsequently, they must assess the request against the relevant provincial legislation and ethical guidelines. If a conflict arises, the professional's duty is to inform the client of the legal and ethical constraints, explain the rationale behind these constraints, and collaboratively explore compliant alternatives that still meet the client's underlying needs. This process ensures both client satisfaction and regulatory adherence. Question 3. The audit findings indicate that a real estate agent in Nova Scotia is representing a client who has explicitly stated they do not want to be shown any properties in buildings or neighborhoods that are family-friendly or have a high concentration of children, as they prefer a quiet, adult-oriented environment. The agent is concerned about how to proceed while adhering to Nova Scotia's fair housing laws. Which of the following approaches best navigates this situation? Option A. Inform the client that their request cannot be accommodated and terminate the professional relationship without further explanation of the legal implications. Option B. Politely explain to the client that refusing to show properties based on familial status is a violation of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, and offer to identify properties that meet their preference for a quiet environment based on factors other than the presence of children, such as building age, amenities, or specific neighborhood characteristics that do not rely on discriminatory criteria. Option C. Directly implement the client's request by only showing properties in buildings or neighborhoods that are explicitly advertised as adults only or are known to have very few families with children. Option D. Proceed to show the client a wide range of properties without directly addressing their specific request about children, hoping they will find something suitable without further discussion on the sensitive topic. The correct answer is B. Politely explain to the client that refusing to show properties based on familial status is a violation of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, and offer to identify properties that meet their preference for a quiet environment based on factors other than the presence of children, such as building age, amenities, or specific neighborhood characteristics that do not rely on discriminatory criteria. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common but critical challenge in Nova Scotia real estate practice, navigating client instructions that may inadvertently lead to discriminatory practices. The professional challenge lies in balancing the client's stated preferences with the absolute legal and ethical obligation to uphold fair housing principles under Nova Scotia's Human Rights Act. Failing to do so can result in significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and harm to protected groups. Careful judgment is required to educate the client and steer the transaction towards compliance without alienating the client or jeopardizing the sale. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves politely but firmly educating the client about their legal obligations and the protections afforded under Nova Scotia's Human Rights Act. This means explaining that refusing to show properties based on familial status is a violation of the law. The real estate professional must then offer to show properties that meet the client's bona fide needs and preferences, e.g., number of bedrooms, proximity to amenities, school districts, without considering protected characteristics. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct, ensuring the client is informed and the transaction proceeds fairly. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves directly implementing the client's discriminatory request by only showing properties that are explicitly stated as adults only, or that would be unsuitable for children. This directly contravenes Section 5 of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination in the sale or rental of housing based on familial status. This action makes the real estate professional complicit in a discriminatory act. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the client's specific instruction regarding children and proceed to show all properties without addressing the underlying discriminatory intent. While this might seem like a way to avoid direct confrontation, it fails to educate the client and leaves the door open for future discriminatory requests or misunderstandings. It also doesn't proactively ensure the client understands their legal obligations. A third incorrect approach is to refuse to work with the client altogether without providing any explanation of the legal framework. While a real estate professional is not obligated to work with every client, terminating the relationship without explaining the reasons related to fair housing can be perceived as unprofessional and may not effectively address the client's potential misunderstanding of their obligations. It misses an opportunity to promote fair housing principles. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always begin by understanding the client's needs and preferences. When these preferences touch upon protected grounds under the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, the professional's duty shifts to educating the client about their legal obligations and the protections afforded to all individuals. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying potential discriminatory requests. 2. Recalling relevant sections of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act. 3. Explaining the legal prohibitions to the client in a clear and respectful manner. 4. Offering alternative ways to meet the client's needs that are compliant with the law. 5. documenting the conversation and the agreed-upon course of action. Question 4. The control framework reveals that a client in Nova Scotia is eager to purchase a property, but has expressed concerns about their ability to secure a mortgage due to a recent credit event and a desire for a higher loan-to-value ratio than typically offered by major lenders. As a Nova Scotia real estate professional, what is the most appropriate course of action to assist this client in their homeownership journey? Option A. Suggest the client consider a lease-to-own agreement, as this can bypass traditional mortgage requirements and allow them to secure the property they want immediately. Option B. Educate the client on the standard mortgage qualification criteria in Nova Scotia, advise them on steps to improve their creditworthiness, and recommend they consult with a reputable mortgage broker to explore all available financing options and obtain a realistic pre-approval. Option C. Assure the client that you have connections with private lenders who can offer flexible terms, and proceed to connect them with these lenders without detailed discussion of interest rates or repayment schedules. Option D. Advise the client to focus their property search on lower-priced homes that fall within the conventional lending limits, even if it means compromising on their desired location or features. The correct answer is B. Educate the client on the standard mortgage qualification criteria in Nova Scotia, advise them on steps to improve their creditworthiness, and recommend they consult with a reputable mortgage broker to explore all available financing options and obtain a realistic pre-approval. Explanation. The control framework reveals that a real estate professional in Nova Scotia faces a significant challenge when a client expresses a desire to secure financing that may not align with standard lending practices or their demonstrated financial capacity. This scenario requires careful judgment to balance the client's aspirations with the professional's duty of care, ethical obligations, and adherence to Nova Scotia's real estate regulations. The challenge lies in providing guidance that is both supportive of the client's goals and grounded in realistic financial possibilities and legal requirements, without misrepresenting potential outcomes or engaging in practices that could lead to financial harm for the client or regulatory scrutiny for the professional. The best approach involves educating the client about the realities of mortgage financing in Nova Scotia, including the typical requirements for down payments, creditworthiness, and debt service ratios as outlined by lenders and regulated by provincial and federal guidelines. This includes advising them on obtaining pre-approval from reputable lenders to establish a realistic borrowing capacity, and discussing various financing options available, such as conventional mortgages, government-backed programs, if applicable and suitable, and the importance of a strong credit history. The professional should also clearly communicate that, while they can facilitate the process, they cannot guarantee financing or influence lender decisions beyond providing accurate and complete information. This aligns with the Nova Scotia Real Estate Services Act, which mandates that registrants act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interests of their clients, while also adhering to fair trading practices. An incorrect approach would be to suggest or facilitate the use of financing methods that are known to be predatory or that circumvent standard lending due diligence without full disclosure and understanding from the client. For instance, recommending private lenders with excessively high interest rates or unfavorable terms without thoroughly explaining the risks and ensuring the client fully comprehends them would be a failure to act in the client's best interest and could violate ethical standards. Another unacceptable approach would be to downplay the importance of a strong credit score or a substantial down payment, or to imply that the professional has undue influence over a lender's decision, as this misrepresents the financing process and could lead the client to pursue unrealistic financial commitments. Such actions could contravene the duty to provide competent service and to avoid misrepresentation, as stipulated by professional conduct rules in Nova Scotia. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes client education and realistic expectation setting. This involves actively listening to the client's needs and desires, then cross-referencing these with established lending criteria and market realities in Nova Scotia. It requires a commitment to transparency, providing clear explanations of financing processes, potential risks, and the professional's role. When faced with a client's ambitious financing goals, the professional should act as a knowledgeable guide, connecting them with qualified mortgage brokers or lenders who can assess their situation accurately, rather than attempting to engineer a financing solution that may be unsustainable or unethical. Question 5. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a dispute arising from an unrecorded easement that benefits a neighboring property. As a real estate professional in Nova Scotia, what is the most appropriate course of action when representing the seller? Option A. Immediately advise the seller that the unrecorded easement presents a significant risk to the title and that disclosure is mandatory, recommending an investigation and potential resolution before proceeding with the sale. Option B. Ignore the unrecorded easement entirely, assuming it will not be discovered or become an issue. Option C. Inform the buyer of the unrecorded easement but advise them to proceed with the purchase and assume the risk, without advising the seller to investigate or resolve it. Option D. Downplay the significance of the unrecorded easement to the seller, suggesting it is unlikely to cause problems and proceeding with the sale without further investigation or disclosure. Correct answer is A. Immediately advise the seller that the unrecorded easement presents a significant risk to the title and that disclosure is mandatory, recommending an investigation and potential resolution before proceeding with the sale. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a dispute arising from an unrecorded easement. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the real estate professional to balance the seller's desire for a swift transaction with the buyer's right to clear title and the legal obligations under Nova Scotia's property law. Failing to address this potential issue proactively could lead to significant legal complications, financial losses, and damage to the professional's reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure all parties are informed and protected. The best approach involves immediately advising the seller that the unrecorded easement presents a significant risk to the title and that disclosure is mandatory. This approach requires obtaining the seller's consent to investigate the easement's validity and extent, and to potentially resolve it through legal means or by obtaining a release before closing. This is correct because the Nova Scotia Real Property Act and common law principles of disclosure and good faith in real estate transactions mandate that material facts affecting title, such as encumbrances like easements, must be disclosed to potential buyers. Proactively addressing the issue protects the buyer's interests and the seller from future liability, aligning with the professional's duty of care and ethical obligations. An incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the unrecorded easement to the seller, suggesting it is unlikely to cause problems and proceeding with the sale without further investigation or disclosure. This is professionally unacceptable because it violates the duty to disclose material facts affecting title, potentially breaching the Nova Scotia Real Property Act and common law duties. It exposes the buyer to legal challenges and the seller to potential litigation. Another incorrect approach would be to inform the buyer of the unrecorded easement, but advise them to proceed with the purchase and assume the risk, without advising the seller to investigate or resolve it. This is ethically flawed as it places the burden of a known title defect entirely on the buyer, without fulfilling the professional's obligation to ensure a clear and marketable title, or at least facilitate its resolution. It also fails to protect the seller from future claims. A further incorrect approach would be to ignore the unrecorded easement entirely, assuming it will not be discovered or become an issue. This is a direct violation of disclosure obligations and professional standards in Nova Scotia. It demonstrates a severe lack of due diligence and can lead to severe legal and ethical repercussions for all parties involved. Professionals should adopt a framework that prioritizes transparency, due diligence, and adherence to legal and ethical standards. This involves identifying potential title issues early, thoroughly investigating their nature and impact, communicating findings clearly to all parties, and recommending appropriate actions to resolve or mitigate risks in accordance with Nova Scotia property law and professional conduct guidelines. Question 6. Analysis of a client's financial situation in Nova Scotia reveals they are a first-time homebuyer with a stable, but not rapidly growing, income. They express a strong desire for predictable monthly housing costs for the foreseeable future and are somewhat risk-averse regarding unexpected financial burdens. Which mortgage recommendation best aligns with their stated needs and Nova Scotia's regulatory expectations for client advice? Option A. A fixed-rate mortgage, as it offers predictable principal and interest payments throughout the loan term, providing the stability the client desires. Option B. A variable-rate mortgage without a rate cap, as it provides the most flexibility in payment amounts based on market fluctuations. Option C. An interest-only mortgage for the initial period, allowing for lower initial payments, which might free up cash flow for other investments. Option D, an adjustable rate mortgage with a low introductory rate, as it could offer savings in the short term if interest rates remain low. The correct answer is a fixed-rate mortgage, as it offers predictable principal and interest payments throughout the loan term, providing the stability the client desires. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the real estate professional to accurately assess a client's financial situation and risk tolerance to recommend the most suitable mortgage type, aligning with Nova Scotia's real estate regulations and ethical obligations. Misjudging the client's needs could lead to financial distress for the client and potential liability for the professional. The best approach involves a thorough discussion with the client to understand their current financial stability, future income expectations, and comfort level with potential payment fluctuations. This client-centered method prioritizes the client's best interests, which is a cornerstone of ethical practice, and aligns with the principles of responsible lending and client advice under Nova Scotia's real estate legislation. By actively listening and gathering comprehensive information, the professional can then guide the client towards a mortgage product that matches their circumstances, such as a fixed-rate mortgage if stability is paramount, or an adjustable-rate mortgage if they have a higher risk tolerance and anticipate income growth. Recommending an interest-only mortgage without a clear understanding of the client's long-term repayment strategy or their ability to manage significantly higher payments once the interest-only period ends is a significant ethical failure. This could expose the client to substantial financial risk and contravenes the duty of care owed to the client. Similarly, pushing an adjustable-rate mortgage on a client who expresses a strong preference for payment predictability and has a less stable income history would be professionally unsound. This disregards the client's stated needs and could lead to financial hardship if interest rates rise, potentially violating the professional's obligation to act in the client's best interest. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's objectives and financial profile. This involves active listening, asking probing questions about their income, expenses, future plans, and risk appetite. Based on this comprehensive understanding, the professional can then explain the characteristics, benefits, and risks of different mortgage types, empowering the client to make an informed decision. The ultimate recommendation should be a collaborative process, ensuring the chosen mortgage product aligns with the client's specific circumstances and regulatory requirements in Nova Scotia. Question 7. The review process indicates that a client in Nova Scotia is considering purchasing a multi-unit residential property primarily for investment purposes. They have provided you with the property's current rental income, estimated operating expenses, and the asking price. They are seeking your guidance on how to evaluate the potential financial performance of this investment. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and professionally responsible course of action for you as a licensed real estate professional in Nova Scotia? Option A. Focus solely on the current market value of the property and advise the client that its appreciation potential is the primary driver of investment success. Option B. Guarantee that the property will generate a specific net operating income within the first year of ownership. Based on the provided figures, Option C. Recommend specific mortgage lenders and suggest a target annual rate of return the client should aim for to ensure a profitable investment. Option D. Explain various real estate investment analysis metrics, such as the gross rent multiplier, capitalization rate, and cash-on-cash return, detailing how these can be used to assess the property's potential income-generating capacity and risk, while emphasizing that these are analytical tools and not guarantees of future performance. The correct answer is D. Explain various real estate investment analysis metrics, such as the gross rent multiplier, capitalization rate, and cash-on-cash return, detailing how these can be used to assess the property's potential income-generating capacity and risk, while emphasizing that these are analytical tools and not guarantees of future performance. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee in Nova Scotia to advise a client on the potential financial viability of an investment property without overstepping into the role of a financial advisor. The licensee must leverage their understanding of real estate investment analysis principles within the bounds of their licensing regulations and ethical obligations. The core difficulty lies in providing insightful analysis that aids the client's decision-making without offering specific financial product recommendations or guarantees. The best approach involves providing a comprehensive overview of various real estate investment analysis methods, explaining their purpose and how they can be applied to the specific property in question. This includes discussing concepts like gross rent multiplier, capitalization rate, and cash-on-cash return, and how these metrics can inform an investor's decision. The licensee should clearly articulate that these are analytical tools to assess potential performance and not guarantees of future returns. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act and its associated regulations, which permit licensees to provide information and analysis related to real estate transactions. It also adheres to ethical standards by empowering the client with knowledge to make their own informed financial decisions, rather than making those decisions for them. The licensee is acting as an informed facilitator, not a financial planner. An incorrect approach would be to recommend specific financing options or suggest a particular rate of return the client should expect. This crosses the line into financial advice, which is outside the scope of a real estate license and could expose the licensee to liability if the investment does not perform as suggested. Such an approach violates the principle of acting within one's professional competence and could be seen as misrepresentation. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the property's current market value without discussing its income-generating potential or operating expenses. Market value is a component of investment analysis. Neglecting the income and expense aspects provides an incomplete picture and fails to equip the client with the tools to assess the property's investment merits. This demonstrates a lack of comprehensive understanding of investment analysis and a failure to adequately serve the client's investment objectives. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to guarantee a specific return on investment based on the provided figures. This is a misrepresentation of the inherent risks and uncertainties associated with real estate investments. Market conditions, tenant occupancy, and unforeseen expenses can all impact actual returns, and any guarantee would be both unethical and likely a violation of real estate trading regulations. The professional reasoning process for a licensee in Nova Scotia facing such a situation should begin with a clear understanding of the client's investment goals. The licensee should then identify relevant real estate investment analysis techniques that can be applied to the property. Crucially, the licensee must maintain a clear distinction between providing information and analysis related to the real estate itself and offering financial advice or guarantees. This involves educating the client on the tools of analysis, explaining their limitations, and encouraging the client to consult with qualified financial professionals for advice on financing and investment strategy. The licensee's role is to provide expertise on the real estate asset, enabling the client to make a well-informed decision in conjunction with their broader financial planning. Question 8. Performance analysis shows that a Nova Scotia real estate licensee is tasked with valuing a highly specialized industrial building. This building is designed for a very specific manufacturing process, has limited comparable sales in the local market, and its current income generation is intrinsically linked to the unique operational needs of its sole tenant. Considering these factors and the regulatory framework governing real estate practice in Nova Scotia, which valuation method would be the most professionally sound and ethically justifiable for the licensee to prioritize? Option A, the income approach, by analyzing the current rental income and applying a market-derived capitalization rate to estimate value. Option B, a comparative market analysis, CMA, by identifying and adjusting for differences between the subject property and recently sold similar industrial properties. Option C, a combination of the income approach and comparative market analysis, with equal weighting given to both methods. Option D, the cost approach, by estimating the cost to replace the building, accounting for depreciation, and adding the land value. The correct answer is D, the cost approach, by estimating the cost to replace the building, accounting for depreciation, and adding the land value. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Nova Scotia real estate licensee because it requires them to select the most appropriate valuation method for a unique property type, a specialized industrial building with limited comparable sales, and a primary function tied to a specific business operation. The challenge lies in balancing the theoretical strengths of different valuation approaches with the practical realities of the Nova Scotia market and the specific characteristics of the subject property. A licensee must demonstrate sound judgment and adhere to professional standards to provide a reliable valuation that meets regulatory expectations. Correct approach analysis. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is the cost approach. This method is best suited for properties that are unique, specialized, or have few comparable sales, such as this industrial building. The cost approach estimates value by determining the cost to replace or reproduce the building, subtracting accrued depreciation, and then adding the value of the land. In Nova Scotia, real estate licensees are guided by the Real Estate Trading Act and its associated regulations, which emphasize providing accurate and well-supported valuations. The Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission, NSREC, expects licensees to utilize valuation methods that are most relevant to the property type and market conditions. For a specialized industrial building, where market-based comparisons are scarce and income generation might be highly specific to the current tenant's operations, the cost approach offers a more objective basis for estimating value by focusing on the physical asset and its replacement cost. This aligns with the ethical obligation to provide competent service and avoid misrepresentation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Using the comparative market analysis, CMA, approach would be professionally problematic. While CMAs are standard for residential properties, they rely heavily on finding recent sales of similar properties. For a specialized industrial building, finding truly comparable sales in the Nova Scotia market is likely to be extremely difficult, if not impossible. This lack of direct comparables would lead to a CMA that is speculative and potentially misleading, failing to meet the NSREC expectation of a well-supported valuation. It could also be argued that relying on a CMA in such a situation constitutes a failure to exercise due diligence and competence. Applying the income approach without significant adjustments or supporting data would also be an inappropriate choice. The income approach values a property based on its potential to generate income. While industrial buildings can generate income, the prompt specifies a specialized industrial building, whose value is primarily tied to its specific operational function. This suggests that its income-generating capacity might be highly idiosyncratic to the current business and not easily transferable or representative of market rental rates for similar general industrial spaces. Without robust market data on comparable rental income and capitalization rates for this specific type of specialized industrial use in Nova Scotia, the income approach would be based on assumptions that are not well supported by market evidence, potentially leading to an inaccurate valuation and a breach of professional duty. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Nova Scotia should approach property valuation by first understanding the nature of the property and the available market data. They must then consider which valuation methods are most appropriate for that specific property type and market context, adhering to the principles of accuracy and due diligence as outlined by the Real Estate Trading Act and NSREC guidelines. When faced with unique properties, licensees should prioritize methods that rely on objective data and minimize subjective assumptions. If multiple approaches are used, the licensee must be able to reconcile any significant differences and provide a clear rationale for the final opinion of value. In situations where a particular approach is clearly unsuitable due to lack of comparable data or unique property characteristics, the licensee has a professional and ethical obligation to explain why that approach was not used or was significantly modified. Question 9. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a significant water leak impacting a rental unit in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The property manager receives a complaint from the tenant about a noticeable water leak from the ceiling in their living room, which has been ongoing for 2 days. The tenant is expressing concern about potential damage to their belongings and the impact on their ability to enjoy their home. The landlord, who lives out of province, has not been updated on any recent maintenance issues. What is the most appropriate course of action for the property manager? Option A. Advise the tenant to contact the landlord directly to arrange for repairs, as the property manager's role is primarily administrative. Option B. Immediately inform the landlord of the leak, the tenant's concerns, and propose a plan to engage a qualified professional to assess and repair the leak, while also communicating with the tenant about the steps being taken and a projected timeline. Option C. Wait for the landlord to contact the property manager for a routine update before mentioning the water leak, assuming the tenant will tolerate the situation for a short period. Option D. Attempt to diagnose the leak and arrange for a general handyman to fix it without informing the landlord or obtaining their explicit approval for the repair? The correct answer is B. Immediately inform the landlord of the leak, the tenant's concerns, and propose a plan to engage a qualified professional to assess and repair the leak, while also communicating with the tenant about the steps being taken and a projected timeline. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a property manager in Nova Scotia to balance the fiduciary duty owed to the landlord with the legal obligations and tenant rights under Nova Scotia's Residential Tenancies Act. The manager must act in the best interests of the landlord, while ensuring all actions are compliant with provincial law and ethical standards, particularly concerning a tenant's right to quiet enjoyment and the proper handling of maintenance issues. The manager's judgment is critical in determining the appropriate course of action that mitigates risk for the landlord without infringing upon the tenant's rights. The best approach involves a proactive and documented communication strategy that prioritizes resolving the issue efficiently and legally. This entails immediately informing the landlord of the situation, outlining the necessary repairs, and proposing a plan of action that respects the tenant's right to quiet enjoyment. Simultaneously, the manager should communicate clearly with the tenant, acknowledging their concerns, providing a timeline for the repairs, and explaining any necessary access arrangements in accordance with the Residential Tenancies Act. This approach ensures transparency, compliance, and demonstrates due diligence in managing the property and the landlord-tenant relationship. Failing to promptly inform the landlord about the significant leak and the tenant's complaint is a failure to uphold the fiduciary duty of keeping the principal informed of all material matters affecting the property. This inaction could lead to further damage and increased repair costs, directly impacting the landlord's investment. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the tenant's complaint until the landlord specifically inquires about maintenance. This demonstrates a lack of proactive property management and a disregard for the tenant's right to a habitable living environment, potentially leading to a breach of the lease agreement and violations of the Residential Tenancies Act. Finally, attempting to address the issue without consulting the landlord or seeking professional advice on the scope of repairs and potential legal implications is also an unacceptable approach. Property managers have a responsibility to act within their authority and to ensure that repairs are conducted by qualified professionals, especially for significant issues like a water leak, and to keep the landlord informed of all significant decisions and expenditures. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue and relevant legal obligations. This is followed by assessing the potential risks and impacts on all parties involved. The next step is to consult the governing legislation, in this case, the Nova Scotia Residential Tenancies Act, and any relevant property management guidelines. Finally, the professional should select the course of action that best balances legal compliance, ethical responsibilities, and the client's, landlord's, best interests, prioritizing clear and documented communication throughout the process. Question 10. Investigation of a potential home purchase in Nova Scotia reveals that the buyer is interested in minimizing their monthly mortgage payments. The buyer has a down payment of 10% and is considering a mortgage of $300,000 with a 25-year amortization period. A conventional mortgage lender has offered an interest rate of 5% compounded semi-annually. A lender offering a CMHC-insured mortgage has quoted an interest rate of 25% compounded semi-annually, with a CMHC mortgage insurance premium of 15% of the loan amount, which is added to the principal. Assuming the mortgage insurance premium is added to the principal for calculation purposes, what is the approximate monthly payment difference between the conventional mortgage and the CMHC-insured mortgage, and which option offers a lower monthly payment? Option A. The conventional mortgage offers a lower monthly payment by approximately $100. Option B. The CMHC-insured mortgage offers a lower monthly payment by approximately $75. Option C. The CMHC-insured mortgage offers a lower monthly payment by approximately $125. Option D. The conventional mortgage offers a lower monthly payment by approximately $50. Correct answer is C. The CMHC-insured mortgage offers a lower monthly payment by approximately $125. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Nova Scotia real estate agent by requiring them to navigate the complexities of government-backed loan programs, specifically the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation (CMHC) programs, in a way that is both financially beneficial for their client and compliant with ethical and regulatory standards. The agent must accurately calculate potential savings and present them clearly, while also ensuring they do not misrepresent the terms or benefits of these programs, which could lead to financial harm for the client or regulatory repercussions. The core challenge lies in balancing the client's desire for the lowest possible mortgage payment with the agent's duty of care and adherence to provincial real estate regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves accurately calculating the potential mortgage payment savings for the client by comparing a conventional mortgage with a CMHC-insured mortgage, considering the mortgage insurance premium. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the client's financial goals by providing concrete, data-driven information about the benefits of CMHC-insured loans. The calculation must be precise, reflecting the actual cost of the mortgage insurance premium and its impact on the amortization schedule, as mandated by responsible lending practices and the ethical obligation to provide accurate financial information to clients. This aligns with the principles of transparency and client advocacy expected of Nova Scotia real estate professionals. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves simply stating that CMHC loans will result in lower monthly payments without providing specific calculations or acknowledging the upfront cost of the mortgage insurance premium. This is professionally unacceptable because it is an oversimplification that can mislead the client into believing there are no additional costs associated with CMHC insurance, failing to meet the duty of providing complete and accurate financial information. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the potential for a lower down payment offered by CMHC-insured mortgages, while neglecting to explain how this impacts the overall cost of borrowing due to the added insurance premium and potentially higher interest rates. This approach prioritizes a single benefit without a holistic view of the financial implications, which is ethically problematic and could lead to a client making a decision that is not in their best long-term financial interest. A further incorrect approach is to estimate the savings based on a general understanding of CMHC benefits without performing a specific calculation for the client's particular mortgage amount and term. This lack of precision is unprofessional and could lead to misrepresentations, potentially causing the client to make financial decisions based on inaccurate projections. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Nova Scotia should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and accurate financial disclosure. This involves understanding the specific details of government-backed loan programs available in Canada, such as those insured by CMHC. When presenting options, professionals must perform detailed calculations that compare the total cost of borrowing under different scenarios, including the impact of mortgage insurance premiums. This ensures clients can make informed decisions based on a clear understanding of all financial implications, thereby upholding ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. Question 11. Comparative studies suggest that real estate licensees in Nova Scotia often face ethical dilemmas when advising clients on investments. If a Nova Scotia real estate licensee has a personal financial interest in a real estate investment trust, REIT, that owns several commercial properties within Nova Scotia, and a client expresses interest in investing in this REIT, what is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the licensee? Option A. Fully disclose their personal financial interest in the REIT and any associated compensation. Provide comprehensive information on the REIT performance, risks, and underlying Nova Scotia properties, and advise the client to seek independent financial advice before making a decision. Option B. Advise the client that the REIT is a sound investment based on their personal experience, without disclosing their own financial involvement or the specific risks associated with the underlying Nova Scotia properties. Option C. Emphasize the potential for high returns from the REIT Nova Scotia holdings and encourage the client to invest quickly before market conditions change, without explicitly mentioning their personal stake. Option D. Suggest that the client invest in the REIT through a different brokerage where the licensee has no personal interest, thereby avoiding any disclosure requirements on their part. The correct answer is A. Fully disclose their personal financial interest in the REIT and any associated compensation. Provide comprehensive information on the REIT performance, risks, and underlying Nova Scotia properties, and advise the client to seek independent financial advice before making a decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee in Nova Scotia to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure fair dealing when advising a client about an investment in a real estate investment trust REIT that holds properties within Nova Scotia. The licensee must balance their client's best interests with their own potential financial gain and uphold their fiduciary duties under Nova Scotia's real estate regulations. Careful judgment is required to avoid misrepresentation and ensure full disclosure. The best professional approach involves prioritizing the client's informed decision-making by providing comprehensive and unbiased information about the REIT. This includes clearly disclosing any personal interest the licensee may have in the REIT or its underlying properties, as well as any commission or compensation received from the REIT or its promoters. This approach aligns with the principles of the Real Estate Trading Act, Nova Scotia, and its associated regulations, which mandate honesty, integrity, and the avoidance of misrepresentation. Specifically, sections related to disclosure of interest and acting in the best interest of the client are paramount. By fully disclosing all relevant information, the licensee empowers the client to make an independent and informed investment decision, thereby fulfilling their ethical and legal obligations. An approach that focuses solely on the potential for high returns without adequately disclosing the risks or the licensee's personal interest is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a failure to act with honesty and integrity, potentially leading to misrepresentation of the investment's suitability for the client. Such conduct violates the duty to disclose material facts and could expose the client to undue risk, breaching the licensee's fiduciary responsibility. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to downplay or omit any mention of the licensee's personal interest in the REIT. This lack of transparency creates a significant conflict of interest and undermines the client's trust. Failing to disclose a personal interest is a direct contravention of regulatory requirements designed to protect consumers and ensure fair dealings in real estate transactions. Finally, an approach that pressures the client into investing without allowing them sufficient time for due diligence or consultation with independent financial advisors is also unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of respect for the client's autonomy and can be construed as undue influence, which is contrary to ethical practice and the spirit of fair representation in real estate dealings. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. This is followed by a thorough review of relevant Nova Scotia real estate legislation and ethical guidelines. The core principle should always be to act in the client's best interest, which necessitates full and frank disclosure of all material facts, including any personal interests. If a conflict cannot be adequately managed through disclosure, the professional should consider withdrawing from the transaction to avoid compromising their duty to the client. Question 12. The investigation demonstrates that a real estate licensee in Nova Scotia, while assisting a client in securing financing for a property purchase, has been offered a referral fee by a mortgage broker for directing clients to their services, particularly for mortgages that require private mortgage insurance, PMI. The licensee knows that this particular mortgage broker's offerings, while potentially including PMI, might not be the most cost-effective or suitable option for the client when all factors are considered. What is the most ethical and professionally responsible course of action for the licensee? Option A. Fully disclose the referral fee arrangement to the client, explain its implications, and then assist the client in exploring all available mortgage options, including those from the referred broker and other lenders, ensuring the client makes an informed decision based on their best interests. Option B. Decline the referral fee and advise the client to seek financing independently, without offering any assistance or guidance on mortgage options. Option C. Advise the client that PMI is a standard and minor cost, and steer them towards the mortgage broker who offers the referral fee, without detailing other potentially better options. Option D. Accept the referral fee from the mortgage broker and recommend their services to the client, emphasizing the convenience of the PMI-inclusive mortgage, without explicitly mentioning the referral fee. The correct answer is A. Fully disclose the referral fee arrangement to the client, explain its implications, and then assist the client in exploring all available mortgage options, including those from the referred broker and other lenders, ensuring the client makes an informed decision based on their best interests. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a real estate licensee in Nova Scotia is faced with a conflict of interest and a potential ethical breach related to private mortgage insurance, PMI. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the licensee to navigate their fiduciary duty to their client, the potential for personal gain, and the regulatory requirements surrounding mortgage financing and disclosure in Nova Scotia. The licensee must exercise careful judgment to ensure they are acting in the best interest of their client and adhering to professional standards. The best professional approach involves prioritizing the client's financial well-being and transparency. This means fully disclosing all relevant information about mortgage options, including the implications of PMI, and assisting the client in obtaining independent financial advice. The licensee should act solely as an advisor, facilitating the client's informed decision-making process without any personal incentive influencing the recommendation. This aligns with the ethical obligations of a real estate professional in Nova Scotia to act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interest of their client, as outlined in the Real Estate Trading Act and its associated regulations, which emphasize disclosure and avoiding conflicts of interest. An approach that involves recommending a specific lender or mortgage product solely because it offers a referral fee to the licensee is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a clear conflict of interest and a breach of fiduciary duty. Licensee is prioritizing their own financial gain over the client's best interest, which is a violation of ethical conduct and potentially the Real Estate Trading Act. Such an action undermines client trust and the integrity of the real estate profession. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to downplay the significance or cost of PMI to the client, especially if the licensee stands to benefit from a particular mortgage arrangement. This lack of transparency and potential misrepresentation can lead to the client making a decision that is not in their best financial interest. It violates the duty of full disclosure and honesty required of licensees. Finally, an approach where the licensee fails to adequately explain the terms and implications of PMI, or assumes the client understands it without proper explanation, is also professionally deficient. While not as overtly self-serving as accepting a referral fee, it still falls short of the licensee's obligation to ensure the client is fully informed and capable of making an educated decision regarding their mortgage financing. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. They must then prioritize their fiduciary duties to the client, ensuring full disclosure of all material facts and potential benefits or drawbacks of any recommended course of action. Seeking clarification from regulatory bodies or legal counsel when unsure is also a crucial step. Ultimately, the client's best interest should always be the paramount consideration. Question 13. A Nova Scotia real estate investor client is eager to acquire a property quickly and is considering two financing options, a hard money loan or seller financing. As their agent, what is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Fully explain the characteristics, risks, and benefits of both hard money loans and seller financing, emphasizing the need for the client to seek independent legal and financial advice before making a decision. Option B. Facilitate the hard money loan application process immediately, as the client's urgency suggests this is the preferred route, and then suggest they consult a lawyer later. Option C. Advise the client to pursue the hard money loan, as it generally offers faster closing times, which aligns with their stated desire for a quick acquisition. Option D. Recommend seller financing, as it is often perceived as a more flexible and less complex option for investors. The correct answer is A. Fully explain the characteristics, risks, and benefits of both hard money loans and seller financing, emphasizing the need for the client to seek independent legal and financial advice before making a decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Nova Scotia real estate agent because it involves navigating the complexities of financing options, specifically hard money loans and seller financing, while upholding ethical duties to their client. The agent must ensure their client fully understands the risks and benefits of each option, and that the chosen financing aligns with the client's financial capacity and investment goals, all within the regulatory framework of Nova Scotia. Failure to do so could lead to financial harm for the client and professional repercussions for the agent. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly educating the client about the nature of hard money loans, including their typically higher interest rates, shorter repayment terms, and the significant risk of foreclosure if payments are missed. Simultaneously, the agent should explain seller financing, detailing how it works, the potential for more flexible terms, but also the importance of a legally sound agreement drafted by legal counsel. The agent must then facilitate the client's informed decision-making by providing objective information and recommending they seek independent legal and financial advice before committing to either option. This approach aligns with the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act's requirement for agents to act in the best interests of their clients, to be honest and truthful, and to avoid misrepresentation. It also upholds the ethical obligation to ensure clients understand the implications of their real estate transactions. Incorrect approach is analysis, recommending a hard money loan solely because it offers a quick closing, without a comprehensive discussion of the associated high costs and foreclosure risks, is ethically problematic. This prioritizes speed over the client's financial well-being and fails to meet the duty of care. Similarly, suggesting seller financing without emphasizing the critical need for independent legal review of the agreement by a Nova Scotia lawyer is a significant ethical lapse. This omission exposes the client to potential legal disputes and financial disadvantages due to poorly drafted terms. Presenting seller financing as a universally easier option than traditional financing, without detailing the specific risks and the necessity of legal counsel, misleads the client and violates the duty to provide accurate and complete information. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach financing discussions by first understanding the client's financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance. They must then present all viable financing options, including their respective advantages and disadvantages, with a particular focus on the risks involved. Crucially, agents must always advise clients to seek independent legal and financial advice to ensure they fully comprehend the terms and implications of any financing agreement. This layered approach, prioritizing client education and independent professional consultation, safeguards the client and upholds professional integrity. Question 14. The audit findings indicate that a real estate agent in Nova Scotia, acting on behalf of a seller, has a personal financial interest in the adjacent property which is also listed for sale. The agent believes that a quick sale of their client's property at a slightly lower price might indirectly benefit their own sale. What is the most appropriate course of action for the agent to ethically and legally manage this situation? Option A. Inform the client verbally about the interest in the adjacent property, but proceed with negotiations as usual, assuming the client understands the situation. Option B. Immediately provide the client with full written disclosure of the agent's personal interest in the adjacent property and the potential implications, and obtain the client's informed written consent to continue representing them. Option C. Proceed with marketing the client's property and advise the client to accept the first offer received, without mentioning the agent's personal interest in the adjacent property. Option D. Suggest to the client that they consider accepting an offer below market value to expedite the sale, as this might indirectly help the agent's own property sale. The correct answer is B. Immediately provide the client with full written disclosure of the agent's personal interest in the adjacent property and the potential implications, and obtain the client's informed written consent to continue representing them. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential conflict of interest and a breach of fiduciary duty by a real estate agent in Nova Scotia. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the agent to navigate competing interests and uphold their legal and ethical obligations to their client, while also potentially benefiting from a related transaction. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the Real Estate Trading Act and its associated regulations, as well as the code of ethics established by the Nova Scotia Association of Realtors. The correct approach involves full disclosure and obtaining informed consent from the client. This means the agent must proactively inform their client in writing about their personal interest in the adjacent property and the potential benefits they might derive from the client's sale. This disclosure should be made before any further actions are taken that could be influenced by the agent's personal interest. The client must then provide their informed consent, understanding the implications of the agent's dual interest. This aligns with the fiduciary duty of loyalty and the requirement for transparency mandated by Nova Scotia real estate law and ethical standards, ensuring the client's interests remain paramount. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the sale without disclosing the personal interest in the adjacent property. This failure to disclose constitutes a breach of the agent's fiduciary duty and violates the Real Estate Trading Act, which requires agents to act honestly and in the best interests of their clients. Another incorrect approach would be to only verbally inform the client of the interest. While disclosure is made, the lack of written documentation and the potential for misinterpretation or omission of crucial details makes this insufficient under regulatory requirements for transparency and client protection. Finally, attempting to downplay the significance of the agent's interest or suggesting the client should accept a lower offer to facilitate the agent's personal gain is a severe ethical and regulatory violation, directly contradicting the agent's obligation to secure the best possible outcome for their client. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client interests and regulatory compliance. This involves a proactive assessment of potential conflicts of interest in every transaction. When a potential conflict arises, the immediate step is to consult the relevant legislation and ethical codes. Full written disclosure to the client, followed by obtaining their informed written consent, is the cornerstone of managing such situations ethically and legally. If the client does not provide consent, or if the conflict cannot be adequately managed through disclosure and consent, the agent should consider withdrawing from the transaction to avoid any appearance of impropriety or actual breach of duty. Question 15. Regulatory review indicates that real estate markets in Nova Scotia, like elsewhere, experience cyclical fluctuations. A licensee is advising a client on whether to list their property for sale. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates a professional understanding of real estate cycles and trends in Nova Scotia? Option A. Recommending a pricing strategy based on general national real estate forecasts and assuming Nova Scotia's market will mirror these broader trends. Option B. Relying on recent conversations with other agents and personal observations of a few high-profile sales in the client's neighborhood to gauge market sentiment. Option C. Conducting a thorough analysis of current and historical Nova Scotia real estate data, including inventory levels, average sale prices, days on market, and relevant local economic indicators, to determine the current market phase and advise the client accordingly. Option D. Advising the client that the market is always predictable and that by waiting a few more months, they can guarantee a significantly higher sale price. The correct answer is C. Conducting a thorough analysis of current and historical Nova Scotia real estate data, including inventory levels, average sale prices, days on market, and relevant local economic indicators, to determine the current market phase and advise the client accordingly. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Nova Scotia real estate licensee because it requires them to interpret and apply knowledge of real estate market cycles to advise a client. Misinterpreting market trends or providing advice based on incomplete or inaccurate information can lead to significant financial consequences for the client and potential professional liability for the licensee. The licensee must demonstrate an understanding of how different phases of the real estate cycle impact property values, buyer and seller behavior, and investment potential within the Nova Scotia market. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive analysis of current and historical Nova Scotia real estate market data, considering factors such as inventory levels, average sale prices, days on market, interest rate trends, and local economic indicators. This approach aligns with the duty of care owed to clients under Nova Scotia's real estate regulations, which implicitly require licensees to possess and apply relevant market knowledge. By synthesizing this information, the licensee can provide informed advice on whether the current market conditions favor a buyer or seller and suggest appropriate pricing strategies or negotiation tactics. This demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to acting in the client's best interest, as mandated by professional conduct standards. Incorrect approach is analysis. Advising a client solely based on anecdotal evidence or recent personal sales experiences is professionally unacceptable. This approach lacks the objective data and systematic analysis required for sound real estate advice and fails to account for broader market trends. It can lead to biased recommendations that do not reflect the true state of the Nova Scotia market. Recommending a strategy based on generalized national real estate trends without specific consideration for Nova Scotia's unique market dynamics is also problematic. While national trends can offer context, local conditions often dictate market performance. Ignoring these specificities can result in advice that is either too aggressive or too conservative for the local Nova Scotia context, potentially harming the client's financial outcome. Suggesting that market cycles are predictable and can be perfectly timed for maximum profit is an oversimplification and potentially misleading. Real estate markets are influenced by numerous unpredictable factors, and while understanding cycles is valuable, guaranteeing perfect timing is unrealistic and unprofessional. This approach can create unrealistic expectations for the client. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a data-driven and client-centric approach. This involves 1. Gathering comprehensive up-to-date market data specific to the Nova Scotia region. 2. Analyzing this data to identify current market phase and likely trajectory. 3. Considering the client's specific goals and risk tolerance. 4. Providing clear, objective advice supported by evidence, outlining potential benefits and risks. 5. Continuously monitoring market conditions and updating advice as necessary. This systematic process ensures that advice is relevant, accurate, and ethically sound, fulfilling the licensee's professional obligations. Question 16. Consider a scenario where a property in Halifax, Nova Scotia, is legally zoned for commercial use under municipal bylaws and has historically been operated as a small retail store on the ground floor with a separate apartment rented out on the upper floor. The current owner has primarily lived in the apartment and occasionally operated the retail space themselves. When listing this property, what is the most professionally responsible approach to classifying its type for marketing purposes, adhering to Nova Scotia's real estate regulations? Option A. Classify the property as commercial, emphasizing its zoning and potential for business, without explicitly detailing the residential component in initial marketing materials. Option B. Classify the property based on a comprehensive review of its zoning, current use, and historical context, ensuring full disclosure of all aspects to potential buyers and documenting the rationale for the primary classification. Option C. Classify the property based on the owner's stated preference, as they are the current occupant and have the most intimate knowledge of its day-to-day operation. Option D. Classify the property solely as residential because it contains a dwelling unit, as this is often the most common type of property for individual buyers. The correct answer is B. Classify the property based on a comprehensive review of its zoning, current use, and historical context, ensuring full disclosure of all aspects to potential buyers, and documenting the rationale for the primary classification. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent complexities in classifying real estate types, especially when a property exhibits characteristics of multiple categories. Misclassification can lead to significant legal, financial, and ethical repercussions for the real estate professional and their client. For instance, a property zoned for commercial use but currently operating as a multi-unit residential dwelling requires careful consideration of its primary intended use versus its current use, and the implications under Nova Scotia's land use bylaws and the Real Estate Trading Act. Professional must exercise sound judgment to accurately represent the property's nature to potential buyers or tenants, ensuring compliance with all relevant legislation and ethical standards. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough investigation into the property's zoning, its current use, and its intended future use, cross-referencing this information with Nova Scotia's provincial legislation, including the Municipal Government Act and any relevant municipal bylaws, as well as the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act. This approach prioritizes accuracy and transparency. By understanding the legal framework governing land use and the ethical obligations of real estate licensees, the professional can definitively categorize the property. If the property is legally zoned for commercial use and has been historically operated as such, even with some residential components, its primary classification would lean towards commercial. However, if the residential use is the dominant and legally permitted use, or if the commercial zoning is outdated and the property is de facto residential, the classification would shift. Professional must document their findings and the basis for their classification, ensuring full disclosure to all parties. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on the property's current physical appearance or the seller's stated preference without verifying legal status. This fails to account for zoning regulations and potential legal noncompliance, violating the duty of due diligence and potentially misleading buyers. Another incorrect approach is to classify the property based on the most lucrative potential use without considering its current legal status or the implications for the buyer. This prioritizes profit over ethical representation and legal compliance. Finally, assuming a property is purely residential because it contains dwelling units, despite evidence of commercial zoning or past commercial activity, is an oversimplification that ignores the multifaceted nature of real estate and the importance of legal classification. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach. 1. Identify the property's physical characteristics and current use. 2. Ascertain the property's legal zoning and any applicable municipal bylaws in Nova Scotia. 3. Review the property's history of use and any permits or variances. 4. Consult relevant provincial legislation such as the Municipal Government Act and the Real Estate Trading Act. 5. Document all findings and the rationale for classification. 6. Ensure full and transparent disclosure to all parties involved. This process ensures that the classification is legally sound, ethically defensible, and in the best interest of the client, while upholding the integrity of the real estate profession in Nova Scotia. Question 17. Upon reviewing a client's mortgage application for a property in Halifax, Nova Scotia, a real estate licensee discovers that the client's stated income appears to be significantly higher than what would typically be expected for their stated profession. The client insists their income is accurate and urges the licensee to submit the application as is, suggesting that the lender will verify it. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensee to take? Option A. Submit the mortgage application with the client's stated income, trusting the client's assertion and the lender's eventual verification process. Option B. Suggest the client temporarily increase their reported income on their tax returns before submitting the mortgage application to align with their stated figures. Option C. Advise the client to obtain a letter from their employer confirming the stated income, even if the employer is aware the income is inflated, to satisfy the lender's initial request. Option D. Advise the client that all income and financial information must be verifiable through supporting documentation and offer to assist in gathering these documents, or suggest the client consult with a mortgage broker for further guidance on providing accurate financial disclosures. The correct answer is D. Advise the client that all income and financial information must be verifiable through supporting documentation and offer to assist in gathering these documents, or suggest the client consult with a mortgage broker for further guidance on providing accurate financial disclosures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee in Nova Scotia to balance their fiduciary duty to their client with the lender's underwriting requirements and the legal obligations under Nova Scotia's mortgage lending regulations. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting information during the loan approval process can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including potential liability for the licensee and the client, and breaches of professional conduct. Careful judgment is required to ensure all disclosures are accurate and that the licensee does not engage in practices that could be construed as mortgage fraud or misrepresentation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves diligently verifying all information provided by the client for the mortgage application and ensuring its accuracy before submission to the lender. This includes confirming the client's stated income, employment status, and down payment source through supporting documentation, as required by standard lending practices and implicitly by the principles of honest and fair dealing expected of licensed professionals in Nova Scotia. This approach upholds the licensee's duty of care to their client by facilitating a legitimate and transparent loan approval process, while also adhering to the spirit of responsible lending and preventing potential misrepresentation to the financial institution. Incorrect approach is analysis. Submitting the application with the client's potentially inflated income figures without independent verification, relying solely on the client's word, is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a failure to exercise due diligence and could be considered misrepresentation to the lender, violating the principles of honesty and integrity expected of a licensed professional under Nova Scotia's real estate regulations. It also exposes the client to the risk of loan denial or future default if the true income cannot support the mortgage payments. Providing the lender with a letter from the client's friend stating they have sufficient funds for the down payment, without obtaining independent confirmation of the fund's origin and availability, is also professionally unacceptable. This approach bypasses standard verification procedures and could be seen as facilitating a fraudulent representation of the client's financial capacity. Lenders require verifiable proof of funds, and a self-serving letter from an acquaintance does not meet this standard, potentially violating lending regulations and professional conduct rules. Suggesting the client borrow the down payment from a family member and then immediately repay it after the mortgage is approved, without disclosing this arrangement to the lender, is a serious ethical and regulatory breach. This is a form of financial deception designed to mislead the lender about the client's actual equity and financial stability. Such an action directly contravenes the requirement for full and honest disclosure to financial institutions and could lead to severe penalties for the licensee, including license suspension or revocation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Nova Scotia must adopt a proactive and diligent approach to information verification. When reviewing client-provided financial details for a mortgage application, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying all critical financial information required by the lender. 2. Seeking and verifying supporting documentation for each piece of information. 3. Clearly communicating to the client the importance of accurate and verifiable information. 4. Refusing to submit information that cannot be substantiated or that appears misleading. 5. Consulting with the lender or a mortgage professional if there are any ambiguities or concerns about the client's financial situation. This systematic approach ensures compliance with regulatory expectations and ethical obligations. Question 18. When evaluating a rural property in Nova Scotia for a potential sale, you, as the listing agent, become aware that the property has a history of agricultural use, including the application of pesticides and herbicides over several decades. The seller, eager to sell quickly, has not disclosed any specific environmental concerns and suggests you simply list the property as is, without mentioning the past agricultural practices. What is the most ethically and legally sound approach to take? Option A. Proceed with listing the property without mentioning the agricultural history, as the seller has not provided any specific evidence of contamination. Option B. Inform the seller that you will list the property but will not proactively disclose the agricultural history unless a buyer specifically asks about past land use. Option C. Advise the seller that due to the property's history of agricultural use, it is a material fact that should be disclosed to potential buyers, and recommend a Phase I environmental site assessment to identify any potential contamination. Option D. Suggest to the seller that they obtain a basic soil test that only looks for common contaminants, which should be sufficient to satisfy disclosure requirements. The correct answer is C. Advise the seller that due to the property's history of agricultural use, it is a material fact that should be disclosed to potential buyers, and recommend a Phase I environmental site assessment to identify any potential contamination. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate professional in Nova Scotia to balance their fiduciary duty to their client with their ethical and legal obligations regarding environmental disclosure. The potential for undisclosed environmental contamination can lead to significant financial liabilities, health risks for future occupants, and damage to the property's value, making careful judgment paramount. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing known or suspected environmental concerns to potential buyers, even if the seller is hesitant. This aligns with the Nova Scotia Real Estate Services Act and its associated regulations, which mandate honesty, integrity, and full disclosure of material facts. Ethically, withholding such information would be a breach of trust and could lead to legal repercussions for both the agent and the seller. Transparency builds trust and allows buyers to make informed decisions, protecting them from unforeseen issues and potential litigation. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize the seller's desire to avoid immediate complications by omitting or downplaying known environmental issues. This directly violates the duty of disclosure and could expose the agent to disciplinary action from the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission, including fines, license suspension, or revocation. Furthermore, it exposes the seller to significant legal liability if the contamination is discovered later. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because the seller has not received formal notice of contamination, there is no issue. Environmental issues can exist without official notification, and a professional has a duty to investigate and disclose material facts that a reasonable buyer would want to know, regardless of formal pronouncements. Relying solely on the absence of formal notice is a failure to exercise due diligence. Finally, an incorrect approach is to advise the seller to conduct a superficial environmental assessment solely to avoid disclosure, without genuinely addressing potential contamination. This is disingenuous and does not fulfill the spirit or letter of disclosure requirements. A proper assessment should be thorough and aimed at identifying actual risks, not merely circumventing disclosure obligations. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and due diligence. This involves understanding the disclosure obligations under Nova Scotia law, actively inquiring about potential environmental concerns, advising clients on the importance of full disclosure, and recommending professional environmental assessments when warranted. When faced with a seller's reluctance, the professional's duty is to educate the seller on their legal and ethical obligations and the potential consequences of non-disclosure, rather than facilitating it. Question 19. A seller in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, is seeking to list their property and has expressed a desire for maximum market exposure. They are also concerned about paying a commission if they find a buyer themselves. The real estate licensee has explained the different types of listing agreements available under Nova Scotia law. Considering the seller's stated preferences and concerns, which of the following approaches best aligns with ethical practice and regulatory requirements? Option A. Agree to an open listing, assuming the seller will handle their own marketing and buyer procurement to avoid commission, without clearly defining the licensee's limited role in compensation. Option B. Suggest an exclusive right to sell agreement but assure the seller that if they find a buyer, the commission will be waived, regardless of the agreement's terms. To secure the listing quickly, Option C. Push for an exclusive agency agreement, emphasizing the seller's ability to find a buyer without paying commission, while downplaying the licensee's marketing efforts and the potential for the seller to overlook qualified buyers. Option D. Recommend an exclusive right to sell agreement, thoroughly explaining how it ensures the licensee is compensated if any party procures a buyer, while also detailing the comprehensive marketing efforts the licensee will undertake to achieve maximum exposure for the seller. The correct answer is D. Recommend an exclusive right to sell agreement, thoroughly explaining how it ensures the licensee is compensated if any party procures a buyer, while also detailing the comprehensive marketing efforts the licensee will undertake to achieve maximum exposure for the seller. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where a real estate licensee in Nova Scotia is presented with conflicting interests and potential ethical breaches related to listing agreements. The challenge lies in balancing the seller's desire for maximum exposure with the licensee's fiduciary duty and adherence to the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act and its associated regulations. The licensee must navigate the nuances of different listing agreement types to ensure compliance and uphold professional standards. The best professional approach involves clearly explaining the implications of each listing agreement type to the seller, ensuring they understand the scope of the licensee's representation and the seller's obligations. This includes detailing how an exclusive right to sell agreement provides the highest level of protection for the licensee's commission by ensuring payment regardless of who procures the buyer, while also offering the seller the benefit of dedicated marketing efforts. This approach aligns with the ethical obligation to act in the client's best interest by providing informed consent and ensuring the agreement accurately reflects the agreed-upon terms and responsibilities, thereby complying with the principles of fair dealing and transparency mandated by the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act. An approach that prioritizes securing an exclusive right to sell agreement without fully explaining the implications to the seller, particularly if the seller expresses reservations about exclusivity or wishes to explore other options, would be ethically problematic. This could be seen as pressuring the client and failing to ensure their informed consent, potentially violating the duty of care and the requirement for full disclosure. Another ethically unsound approach would be to agree to an open listing without clearly defining the terms of compensation and the scope of services to be provided by the licensee. This ambiguity could lead to disputes over commission and a lack of commitment to marketing the property effectively, undermining the licensee's professional responsibilities and potentially contravening the spirit of fair representation. Furthermore, Agreeing to an exclusive agency listing, while implicitly encouraging the seller to find a buyer themselves to avoid commission, would be a misrepresentation of the agreement's intent and a breach of fiduciary duty. The licensee would be failing to act in good faith and potentially misleading the seller about the benefits and obligations of the chosen listing type. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the client's objectives and risk tolerance. This is followed by a clear and comprehensive explanation of the available listing agreement options under Nova Scotia law, including their respective advantages and disadvantages for both the seller and the licensee. The licensee must ensure the client makes an informed decision based on complete information and their own best interests, documenting all discussions and agreements meticulously. Question 20. The risk matrix shows a potential conflict of interest when a Nova Scotia licensee, who has an existing relationship with a buyer, is approached by a seller to list their property, and the seller indicates they would be willing to consider offers from the licensee's existing buyer. If the licensee were to proceed with representing both the seller and the buyer in this transaction, and the buyer's maximum offer price is $500,000, while the seller's minimum acceptable price is $475,000, what is the most ethically and legally sound approach for the licensee to manage this situation, considering the potential for a $25,000 commission on the sale? Option A. Advise the seller that due to the existing relationship with the buyer, it would be best to have separate representation, but then proceed to represent the buyer exclusively, leveraging knowledge of the seller's situation to secure a favorable deal for the buyer. Option B. Proceed with representing the seller and discreetly inform the buyer of the seller's minimum acceptable price, while withholding the buyer's maximum offer price from the seller. Option C. Accept the listing from the seller and proceed to represent the buyer as well, without explicitly disclosing the dual agency, assuming the existing relationship with the buyer implies a tacit understanding of their interests. Option D. Immediately disclose the potential dual agency to both the seller and the buyer. Obtain written informed consent from both parties to proceed as a dual agent, and then facilitate the transaction impartially, ensuring both parties are aware of all material information and their respective rights and obligations. The correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the potential dual agency to both the seller and the buyer. Obtain written informed consent from both parties to proceed as a dual agent, and then facilitate the transaction impartially, ensuring both parties are aware of all material information and their respective rights and obligations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict of interest that arises when a real estate licensee attempts to represent both the seller and the buyer in the same transaction without full disclosure and informed consent. The Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act and its associated regulations, along with the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission's Code of Ethics, mandate clear agency relationships and prohibit deceptive practices. Navigating this situation requires a deep understanding of fiduciary duties and the legal framework governing real estate transactions in Nova Scotia. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to regulatory requirements. This means immediately disclosing the potential dual agency situation to both parties. If both parties agree to proceed with the licensee representing both their interests, a formal written agreement must be obtained from each party, clearly outlining the nature of the dual agency and the limitations on the licensee's fiduciary duties. This agreement must acknowledge that the licensee cannot advocate for one party to the detriment of the other and must treat both parties fairly and honestly. The licensee must then act impartially, providing all material information to both parties and facilitating the transaction without favoritism. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of informed consent, full disclosure, and fair dealing, which are cornerstones of ethical real estate practice in Nova Scotia. It ensures that both the seller and the buyer understand the implications of the dual agency and have voluntarily agreed to the arrangement, thereby mitigating legal and ethical risks. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the transaction without fully disclosing the dual agency to both parties. This failure to disclose is a direct violation of the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act and the Code of Ethics, which require licensees to act with honesty and integrity and to disclose all material facts, including agency relationships. Such a failure erodes trust and can lead to legal repercussions, including disciplinary action by the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission. Another incorrect approach would be to implicitly assume that because the buyer is a repeat client, the licensee can prioritize the buyer's interests over the seller's, even in a dual agency situation. This is ethically and legally untenable. In a dual agency, the licensee's duty is to both parties, and they cannot favor one over the other. Prioritizing one client's interests would constitute a breach of fiduciary duty to the other client, violating the principles of fair representation. A further incorrect approach would be to attempt to negotiate the price solely based on the licensee's knowledge of the buyer's maximum willingness to pay, without fully informing the seller of all relevant market information or the buyer's motivations. This constitutes a misrepresentation and a failure to provide competent service to the seller, as the licensee is not acting in the seller's best interest by withholding information that could influence their negotiation strategy. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with an immediate assessment of potential conflicts of interest. If a conflict arises, the licensee must consult the relevant sections of the Nova Scotia Real Estate Trading Act and the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission's Code of Ethics. The paramount principle is full and frank disclosure to all parties involved. If a dual agency situation is unavoidable and both parties consent in writing after full disclosure, the licensee must then proceed with utmost impartiality, ensuring that all fiduciary duties are understood and respected within the limitations of the dual agency agreement. If full disclosure and informed consent cannot be obtained, or if the conflict is too significant to manage ethically, the licensee should decline to represent one or both parties.